We shall now begin with our session 4 on sustainability, climate change and competition policy. The panelists for this session are Augustine Peter, Head AP Regulatory Law Practice and former member, Competition Commission of India. Willard Mivemba, Director and Chief Executive Officer, COMESA, Competition Commission, who will be joining us virtually. Joel Abraham, Chief Executive Officer, Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission, who will be joining us virtually again. Then we have Hee Kim, Director of Competition Policy, Asia Pacific Meta. Elena Rowenska, Program Director, Advancing Systems Analysis, International Institute for Applied System Analysis, Austria. Ettore, Professor of Private Law and International Business Law, University of Florence School of Law. Then we have Rijit Sen Gupta, Chief Executive Officer, Center for Responsible Business, New Delhi. Then we also have Victor, Program Officer, Health, Intellectual Property and Biodiversity Program. He'll be joining us virtually. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. I think we are going to start. We have the topic sustainability, climate change and competition policy. And we have 7 panelists. With the result, we are limiting the first intervention to 7 minutes. And thereafter, there will be some question answer, and also it will be open to the floor. Now, the topic is sustainability, climate change, competition policy. Sustainability, as we all know, it is basically climate change is something which just stares us in the face. It is no more a fiction. It is a reality. Everyday basis, we are facing the reality. And there are different dimensions. First, economic, environmental, then social and governance. Climate change issue got the attention of humanity long time back. But Stockholm Convention, 72, Kyoto Protocol, finally coming to Paris Agreement, which concretized and also made binding commitments on countries. Paris Agreement of 2015 set a target of reducing global temperature to about 2 degrees Celsius, above the pre-industrial. It was brought again down to 1.5 degrees Celsius later by the turn of the century. As we all know, many studies have found, including by the UN, that these are targets which are too little, too late. Now this issue, we have number of panelists looking at the issue of climate change, sustainability, and especially the issues faced by small economies or island economies who have a specific problem of their own. The issue of technology transfer, because technology, green technology in particular, is very, very extremely important to address the issue of climate change. Coming to competition policy, here it is competition policy, includes competition law as well. And this conference, I actually congratulate CUTS to have highlighted equity versus efficiency, that debate. That is extremely important. When it comes to competition law traditionally emphasizes pristine objectives of competition, efficiency, economic efficiency. But over a period of time, you have seen that especially EU 101 clause 3 and Indian Competition Act proviso to section 3.3 speaks in terms of efficiency enhancing sort of joint ventures or concerted or joint action, which gets a more specific treatment. For example, in India, instead of presumption, only rule of reason is applied. And rule of reason itself, which has become more common, way of addressing competition and practices, conduct of enterprises. That also gives scope. But at the same time, the issue is not that simple. I don't want to go further into this. First, we have Elena Kovenskaya, who is a program director, advancing systems analysis, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, Austria. She will be speaking about a bit broad, but towards sustainability, promoting competition law and policy.
Thank you so much. The slides have been put on the screen, so maybe I can start already. So thank you very much indeed for having this session. I completely agree with our chair that this is a very, very important topic, and it's great to see that this time actually trying to tackle it. Next slide, please. And what I would like to start from, next slide, please, is to remind ourselves that sustainability considerations and SDGs as manifestation of sustainability is not just a nice thing to have. This is really a manifestation, a realization of human rights. This is specification of them in concrete terms, both in terms of so-called N, so indicators of the development, as well as enablers that is needed. And through that, SDG framework becomes really a comprehensive framework that can guide and should guide the actions of the government. Next slide, please. So this is not just a nice thing to have, this is something that becomes the imperative for the government to act upon. On the other hand, as it was just reminded to us, indeed, SDGs and sustainability concept overall really builds on these three indivisible pillars: social pillar, environmental pillar, and economic pillar. And the point is that only when they intersect together, as the simple illustration depicts here, you can achieve sustainability. You cannot achieve it by emphasizing one pillar or the other. So the study that I'm citing here on this slide evaluated the relative contribution of each of the 17 SDGs to the subjective perception of people about their happiness and about their well-being. And it's not surprising, so you can see on this pie diagram the relative contribution of every SDG. So every SDG makes a substantial contribution to our well-being, but it's unequal. And it's not surprising that it is SDGs 9, 8, and 12 that appear to contribute the most to our perception of happiness and well-being. And these are the SDGs that have to do with economic growth, employment, innovation, and so on and so on. So these are the core SDGs in some sense that contribute to our well-being the most. The next slide, please. And that is, of course, not surprising because, and that is all at the global level I'm talking about, because poverty and inequality, as many times was emphasized during this meeting already, obviously remains a very big problem. The world has made some success with eradicating extreme poverty, but not so much success with general poverty. And therefore, it's not surprising that we see these connections. The next slide, please. But not only poverty remains a problem. On all SDGs, we actually observe really no major success. Of 17 SDGs, 15 have been marked as those that have major or significant challenges. And none of them, as you can see, again, I'm talking about the global level, none of them has the status on track. So the situation is really not that great. At the global level, at the country level, which the second figure illustrates here, different countries obviously make different progress, and you can see here the progress of BRICS countries, where India in particular made some progress on the overall SDG score, but maybe I can say only in comparison with other countries. So overall, the progress is quite modest. The next slide, please. So what's the problem? Why is this like that? So if you analyze this from this kind of overall perspective, you can come up with conclusions that two aspects important here. So policy fragmentation and the lack of systems approach have been named as core reasons why we underachieve on SDGs. So this diagram, for example, here represents empirical evidence on trade-offs, which are green, which are red, and synergies, which are green, between multiple SDGs. And as you can see, the picture is really dominated by both green and red, and very little yellow, which would mean no relation. So these SDGs
an SDG framework is really a set of highly and strongly interconnected indicators, and therefore I emphasized in the beginning this indivisible nature of SDG framework. The next slide, please. So policy coherence in particular was named as really a reason why we don't achieve SDGs. We planned one policy to achieve one objective and another, and it's not necessarily that it is coherent. And you would think that, and it is true that policy coherence, also empirical evidence shows that it adds a lot to the policy efficiency. However, of course, this is not a silver bullet. Here we see, for example, an opposite example. So sometimes policy coordination between key stakeholders, like in this study, between government, private sector, and local elites, not only can lead to environmental degradation, as in these three countries, Mexico, Peru, and Indonesia in this case study, but also to create social harm. So again, the picture is not black and white. And this is what brings us to competition law and policy consideration, where coordination is sometimes or often is seen as a negative thing. So this inconsistency also needs to be resolved. The next slide, please. So together with the BRICS Center and IASA, the institution that I'm representing, we conduct an extensive literature review where we analyzed how sustainability considerations are now connected or used in the competition law and policy, and we came up with some observations. One obvious observation, which we also see from this event, that this debate about the relationship between the two is actually emerging or has emerged already. It is focusing on the extent and the limits of integrating sustainability considerations into competition law and policy. In particular, suggestions have been made to include things like food security, human health, and inequality into competition analysis. We also observed the increase in the number of cases involving sustainability defense, and some jurisdictions obviously are ahead of others in doing that. So this kind of observations bring us to really a much wider question, which is remaining unresolved again, as we also discussed yesterday, the questions of the goals that should be pursued by a competition policy and law. Yes. So further observations from this analysis includes the following, that very often we see that this debate almost exclusively focuses on climate change and environmental dimensions. And again, I repeat that this indivisible nature of SDGs should rather be taken into consideration. Often debate focuses on exemptions for sustainability agreements and pays less attention to other forms that should be in the attention of competition authorities. Often we also see that this debate prefers to view competition law as hindrance and disregarding the sword role of the competition law that can be here. And then also we see that mainly the debate is taking place currently in the western part of the world, let's say like that. The next slide, please. In BRICS countries, they pay some attention to this topic, but somewhat less, with the exception of South Africa, where social considerations are really strongly integrated already in the competition consideration. Next slide, please. So to summarize here, this policy coherence, systems approach, and the movement from narrow definition of well-being to a broader definition of, narrow definition of welfare towards the broader definition of well-being. These are three arguments that we think could bring us to really integrating sustainability considerations into the competition law. Next slide, please. That's basically all I wanted to share with you, just to summarize that SDGs provide comprehensive framework to guide the activities of governments and other stakeholders, and we really must do something with this insufficient progress on SDGs. That's really becoming a major issue. Policy coherence, systems approach, and broader understanding of welfare are three reasons why we may want to incorporate sustainability considerations. Competition law actually is very powerful yet underutilized lever to facilitate achievements of SDGs, as again we just saw from this literature review. And finally, some competition authorities have started to introduce these considerations, but they focus predominantly on environmental dimensions, and the lack of systems approach therefore may undermine these actions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lena, for putting the issue in perspective, correct perspective, I would say, in very limited time. Can we move to Victor Ido, Program Officer, Health South Center? He will be speaking on green technology transfer to the global south. And he will be joining virtually. Are you there?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Instead of sharing my screen, because a few of the points have already been mentioned by the previous speaker, to whom I thank you a lot, I will just be sharing the comments, also given the 7-minute threshold. So my name is Vitor Ido. I'm originally from Brazil, so I'll make reference to a couple of cases there. I'm part of the South Center, which is an intergovernmental organization of developing countries based here in Geneva. Although we are intergovernmental in nature, meaning we have 55 developing countries as members, I'm here speaking, of course, in my personal capacity, and also noting that we conduct a policy-oriented research, and this is where I'm coming from to speak at this point. So as you mentioned, we wanted to focus not only on issues with respect to technology transfer, but more broadly thinking how competition law can be designed for sustainability, but from a global South perspective. I'm going to point out 4 main points to start. The first is that, of course, sustainability and climate change are at the core of global discussions, and somehow, therefore, accordingly, there must be the integration of these concerns into competition policy. Of course, the second point already quite extensively mentioned by the previous speaker is that the promotion of global cooperation is, of course, often seen as something at odds with the traditional views on competition law. But having said that, global cooperation really seems to be one of the focuses at this point. A third point would be that the possibility of incorporating such concerns under a renewed consumer welfare standard surely can be considered, and potentially that is something that most countries will be likely be doing. But we can also go much beyond this, at least from an international law perspective, meaning you can adopt different doctrines or different approaches to the issue. A fourth point, which seems kind of obvious, but always important to restate, is that the priorities for developing countries are often distinct from those of developed countries. Just to note a few points, I just wanted to insist on this idea that a broader view of competition law really is important for this topic. Firstly, sustainability concerns becoming a legitimate goal, an explicit legitimate goal under competition law and policy. But what I wanted to insist on is that while developed countries are expanding their intervention analysis with such kind of concerns, developing countries may have different priorities and different needs, so they do not really need to replicate them in the same way. And as I said, this idea of a broad policy space under international law is really an important point here. I'm just going to briefly mention a couple of issues to make this point a little bit clearer. So, for instance, a recent UNCTAD report on sustainability, consumer protection, and sustainability notes a number of cases, including, for instance, in my own country, Brazil, in 2008, how biodiversity was considered in a major review agreement, and the impact for biodiversity are one of the things mentioned. So the Brazilian authority back then had made reference to biodiversity protection and concerns with respect to the impact of the merger, which would then require a number of measures to be taken so that it could be approved. Although that was this is the kind of decision that was often not referred to, this shows not only that the considerations on sustainability, biodiversity, and climate change are not only something that has been expanding in developed countries' jurisdictions, but something that has been legitimately seen as an issue for a long time in many other countries. And in addition to this, one argument that we would like to raise is how there might be at least partial lessons from other fields, including pharmaceuticals. In a recent publication by myself in 2020, we have explored how competition policies can be designed for health purposes, particularly public interest purposes. This has included the recognition of multiple anti-competitive conducts in the pharmaceutical sector, including some related to intellectual property. I'm going to go back to this point, which relates to the notion of a technology transfer, how doctrines of abuse can be applied per se, at least under international law, and this is, of course, again, a decision by countries. How access and licensing issues can be at the core, and this particular point is really relevant with respect to sustainability and climate change perspectives, and that includes notions of compulsory licensing, friend licensing, and even other models. And finally, I already mentioned the notion of merger control with environmental concerns, and applying from pharmaceuticals, of course, now to environmental concerns. One thing I wanted to mention, however, is that there are strong reasons for developing countries to be not only skeptical, but to be mindful of what's going on in developed countries. While Brazil, for instance, in that case, had that particular concern with impacts to biodiversity, and that included, of course, the fact that seeds being concentrated under a sole economic entity can become a problem for biodiversity to the extent which they're going to be limiting it. What we see at the same time are efforts by developed countries to expand monopolies on seeds and plant variety protections, such as the European Union and EFTA in their free trade agreements. This is just one of the cases where you see an interaction not only of competition law and other realms, but of trade policies, protectionist measures, we could even call them, and the effectiveness of competition policies in developing countries. So one of the issues that I wanted to raise here, and that seems to be at the core of the whole point, is that not only developing countries can and should explore their own measures, but if a global cooperation really is to be achieved, there must be some new mechanisms and more concerns and cooperation by developed countries as well. Although this, of course, is not solely related to competition policies, what cannot be seen is an attempt to advance concerns of sustainability under a protectionist guise. So just to give an example, more recently this year as well, the Brazilian Competition Authority, and that was already mentioned in the previous speaker's slide as well, rejected the merger on the Catena X case. That referred to a global joint venture between a number of global companies that would incentivize the sharing of information or better integration on inter alia car parts. The operation had already been approved in Chile, South Korea, Poland, Ukraine, Germany, and the European Commission, and there was only Brazil missing. Brazil eventually decided to reject, as I already noted, this merger. While the companies and the countries argue that Brazil is simply impeding the sustainability efforts, maybe the political economy is really at the core of what should be discussed. On the one hand, yes, it's true that the Brazilian Competition Authority may have had a more traditional approach to it, only focusing on traditional competition efforts and methods of analysis to achieve that discussion. At the same time, however, we see how the positive impact of this change with respect to the automobile industry does not necessarily reflect the same priority and concerns of Brazil, a country which has clean energy for almost 100% of its energy sources for over 30 years, therefore dramatically different from other countries, by the way, and where the main issues at stake might be related to biodiversity and other related areas. So ultimately, this just shows that there are, of course, fragmentation, lessons, and of course, caveats to the applicability of competition law and policy to achieve sustainability and climate change efforts. Because we do not have much time, I'm just going to conclude with a few main points. So restating that competition is not at the core of sustainability and climate change. This cannot be understated. Developing countries may have different needs from developed countries. But if measures become de facto protectionism, the Global South will legitimately oppose those measures. A final point refers to the need for policy alignment under a broader view of competition law, which includes intellectual property, the need for technology transfer, the assessment of value chains, and industrial policy. A final remark is that more attention is needed towards non-Western jurisdiction, including, but not only BRICS. Thank you very much for the opportunity and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. You yourself have summarized whatever you have presented. So I don't venture into repeating that. So now we have Rijit Sengupta. He is Chief Executive Officer, Center for Responsible Business in New Delhi. He will be speaking to us regarding dealing with greenwashing. Greenwashing, we are all aware. That is products which are not environmentally sort of friendly, or they will masquerade as friendly products and encash on it and make supernormal profit. Let me see that. So let us listen to him.
Thank you, Chair. Great to be here. An absolute pleasure. an honor as well. Some of you might be aware, I used to work with CUTS, worked here for about 12 years. Since I joined the organization that I work for, the Center for Responsible Business, which is a think tank working on sustainability issues across different sectors. Before I get into my slides, let me also do a bit of an interaction with the audience here and raise of hands. How many of you know what greenwashing is? Super, very informed audience here. How many of you have been a victim of greenwashing, or you think you might have been a victim of greenwashing? Okay, all right, the numbers go down. Last one, I promise. How many of you took some action when you realized that you were a victim of greenwashing? Super, Alan, well done. Great, thanks a lot. So, can I have my slides, please? Yeah, okay, great, thanks. So, this is a slide which basically talks about what greenwashing is. For most of you, you already are aware that it is a practice in the market. It's a practice in the market, and therefore we are talking about greenwashing in this competition policy and law conference here organized by CUTS. It's a practice in the market of falsely misleading consumers and to a certain extent other economic actors by talking about and making false claims about deceptive claims about sustainability performance of a product or a service. In most cases, a greenwashing is green in colors. That is, it refers to claims about the environmental performance of companies. But gradually, market operators are getting intelligent, and it is also covering some of the social elements, some of the elements which are also talked about earlier. So there could be various kinds of claims about 100% natural, eco-friendly, environmental friendly, even organic, without substantiated evidence about those products, and that's greenwashing. Next slide, please. So why is greenwashing a topic that we are talking about in a conference on competition and a conference of today? It is a contemporary issue, and it is becoming even more important because a number of companies over the years have been using different market-driven mechanisms or instruments to talk about their performance on sustainability. As was indicated by my earlier speaker, the challenge of climate change, of inequality, of equity are real challenges. And it is very clear that the private sector has and can play a role in addressing those challenges. And therefore, the private sector would like to highlight its ability to address those challenges, and in a competitive market, sometimes get carried away by going beyond what it actually should be talking to consumers, by talking about things which are unsubstantiated claims. Standards, certification systems, labels, claims are all becoming very, very predominant market-driven instruments, which companies are using to talk to their consumers, to talk to their investors, and other actors inside and outside of the market. And therefore, there is a proliferation of greenwashing. The European Union, in a study in 2021, found that there were more than 42% of claims were either deceptive or exaggerated or even false. How does, pardon me, how does greenwashing affect us, us as consumers and also us as businesses? Consumers will lose the trust. We feel that there are possibly companies which are trying their best to address sustainability in some way, either the climate change problem or even the social equity and inequality issues. But if there is a proliferation of greenwashing in the market, then we will become even more skeptic about such products. And that also affects businesses. So it is not just a consumer-related problem, it is also a problem for the market. There are some companies which are genuinely trying to improve and talk about their sustainability performance and report about them and disclose through their disclosures and so on and so forth. But if there's a proliferation of greenwashing in the same market that they are operating in, then they lose the incentive of investing more effort into being sustainable because of the lack of a level playing field. And therefore, it is not just an issue which is of importance only for the consumers, but I'd like to argue it is also something which is an important issue for the businesses. This is a report about 6 months ago by Greenpeace on called Greenwash Danger Zone. And if you look at the figure on the right hand side, you can't probably read, but these are all the fashion brands that you and I know about. Talk about one, it's on this list. And if you see, this is essential in an assessment of the claims made by the fashion brands about various things, mostly on the environmental side, but some social elements as well. And the red dots don't make this as an impressive report. The red dots are the red herrings or the red sort of red flags. So many of the companies which are making claims about their products are not really supporting them with the right kind of evidence. So it's on the rise. That's the point that I wanted to make. So what are we doing? Next slide, please. What are we doing about this? What can be done? And this is where probably the attention of the competition authority becomes a little bit more interesting. So a number of OECD country competition authorities, Canada, the US, Australia, next slide, Norway, and the United Kingdom have initiated cases of either alleged or reported cases of greenwashing. And competition authorities, and this is, I think my previous speaker talked about the different approaches by competition authorities of being traditional and looking at competition issues with a traditional lens, and also the possibility and the importance of being equipped to look at some of these contemporary issues. The market for sustainability is growing, and unfortunately, sustainability professionals like us, we haven't done as much work on the demand side so far. We have invested all our efforts on the supply side by ensuring and highlighting that companies should be sustainable and address the challenges of climate and of inequality. But we haven't created the market for sustainable goods and services, which is now being done. So therefore, this is an issue of the present and of the future for the competition authorities to start pulling up their sock and to look at these issues much more closely. Next slide. I'll finish in next 2 minutes, Chair. In some countries, some jurisdictions, for example, the European Union is also developing a directive on green claims. And it is likely, like so many things happening in Brussels, is also going to likely to become into a law over the next few months, perhaps even a year. Some agencies like Singapore encourage consumers to report to them such cases of greenwashing. So if Alan was there in Singapore, perhaps he would have raised his hands and went to the regulator. What France has done is interesting, and this is probably something that we can learn from, is they have also created a sort of a set of guidelines on how to avoid the risk of greenwashing, especially for companies. So again, attention and sort of investing in actions both for the consumers and for the companies. Next. So what do we do in India? Double click into India. We do have the regulatory landscape which is enabling. For some reason, I don't know, I took out the the Competition Act from this slide, but I think it should be reinstated. The Consumer Protection Act does have provision about the Central Consumer Protection Agency in India to deal with the misleading advertisement. And I think that the Competition Commission perhaps should not remain indifferent because of, depending on the nature and the scale of the greenwashing related issues, they probably will have to play some role, as some of the other organs of the government, the Ministry of Environment and Forest, even the market regulator, SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India, is doing by telling companies and issuers of debt, green debt, how to avoid the risk of greenwashing. the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Advertisers Standards Council of India are also in the process of developing an initiative on greenwashing. So we do have the right regulatory landscape. What is important, all comes down to implementation. Like perhaps you guys discussed yesterday, and for the 20 years that I've had an sort of stint with competition policy, it is all about implementation. Last point, which is about many of you who are from Delhi or even outside would have seen this big poster about Mission Life. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, with our Honorable Prime Minister's picture in it. So the Mission Life is essentially about mission lifestyle for the environment, which is something which the government of India has initiated, and it has also been now sort of plugged into the Brazilian G20 as well. And it is an international agenda which is being promoted by the government to have what we are calling pro-planet people, 1 billion pro-planet people, by changing lifestyles of ours on a day-to-day basis. So Mission Life, there is also the risk of the objectives of Mission Life being stifled if greenwashing isn't addressed, and it can be done through the three components of Mission Life. One is to engage consumers and sort of build their awareness about how to deal with greenwashing and how to even detect greenwashing. Right now, we have very poor understanding of it. Businesses, of course, also.
Vijit, you may have to conclude.
Yeah, I'm just concluding in 10 seconds. Businesses also, how do you avoid greenwashing? Create a simple set of guidelines, give it to businesses so that they can stay on the right side of the law. And most importantly, for the policy in terms of, where to find redress, both for consumers and businesses. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Rajit. At least I am surprised that 42% of the claims are exaggerated or false, even in a European Union where the consumers are so enlightened. We can imagine what will be happening, what is happening in countries like India or developing countries where consumers go by the whatever is on the cover of the. And I also feel that competition authorities with the consumer protection with them, I think they may be more effective. Here, I think more maybe consumer protection authorities, and also I think food and regulators, because most of the products they ride on that. So I think we will come back to that. Now we have with us Ettore Lombardi, who is a professor of private law and international business law, University of Florence School of Law. He will be enlightening us on evolving jurisprudence on competition and sustainable development. Very critical topic.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here. For me, it's a privilege and an honor. So thank you to CUTS-CIRC and BRICS Center of Policy. The slides are on. Yeah, as the moderator stressed, so we will analyze today the evolution of jurisprudence related to competition law. And I would like to start with this sentence of one of the person that analyzed much better than any other, in my humble opinion, the idea of evolution. So Charles Darwin, who said, it is not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent that survives, is the one that is the most adaptable to change. So evolution is very important, and we will see these profiles very soon. So the agenda, don't worry, I'll be very fast and furious as well. I will try to be furious. Is related to a very short introduction that will make reference to what already Yelena said. So the function of sustainability and the idea of sustainability. Then we will skip and we will analyze, we'll have a theoretical view of the relationship between competition law and sustainability, and then a practical view of this idea. So to start, I would like just to point out this profile. I don't want to come back to sustainability, what is the function and the meaning, because Yelena expressed very well what is the UN SDG goals. So I don't want to come on that. But what I would like to stress is the difference between CSR, ECG, and sustainability, because we have these three concepts, and I humbly consider them slightly different because CSR is a more ethical profile, also less extended and wide than ECG, that is a more wide because include environmental, social, and governance for sure, but we can analyze it in a more financial way in general. And then we have as well the consideration of sustainability that is in the middle. So if we want to stress the differences between these concepts, it's not just the wideness for sure, but as well a different nature. So ethical for CSR, financial for ECG, and sustainability as an economic approach and consideration. So very broad analysis, the one related to sustainability. And I would like to stress what Brundtland report said in 1987, describing for the first time the sustainability as an intergenerational approach. So it's an idea that is giving us accountability, reliability, accountability and responsibility between generations. And that's, in my view, what is, in short, sustainability. So do we need a new frame? So to understand better what is sustainability, for sure, and that's what Elena described properly. So the function of the UN SDG goals, why these goals are quite important, because for the first time there is a list of all the objective targets that people, the companies, authorities, and so forth, that they want to analyze and they want to stress what is sustainability have to face and have to work on. So in short, we can consider three different layers of sustainability. The first one is an economic idea, that the one that I described before shortly. The second one is the social sustainability, that is more related to the human well-being. And then there is the environmental sustainability. That's very important to stress these three profiles, because usually we consider sustainability just in terms of environmental. So environment, what is the protection of the environment? And for example, if we analyze the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, sorry, I'm a European, so I stress as well this profile. If we consider Article 37, there is the description of the environmental protection as a way to be more sustainable. But that's not the point, because our point is to consider more the social sustainability, so the profile of what we can do to improve our wellness as human beings. And that's why, if we consider social sustainability, we stress points and ideas like equitability, inclusivity, respect of human rights, and so social cohesion, justice, and empowerment. That's they are the so-called stars, North Stars or South Stars that we have to consider. And here there is a helicopter view of what is social sustainability and the targets of social sustainability. So I will skip them because I cannot enter in this profile. So step 2 is the idea of what is the intersection, between competition and sustainability. We will consider this idea by a theoretical point of view at the first glance, and then we will consider a more practical view. So if we consider the theoretical profile, we have to start from an assumption. The assumption that we have to analyze is jurisprudence can be important for competition law to stress the idea that are underpinned competition law. So we can combine these two ideas, competition and sustainability, in terms of having a progress in society and in terms of general sustainability. For sure, there is a progressive understanding of this combination, so the possibility to use the tools of competition law, not just, for example, yesterday, Teresa was stressing this profile regarding not considering competition law just as an antitrust or something very technical directed to control the market. But we can consider competition law as well in other terms, and that's why I would consider this progressive idea of using competition law as well in terms of sustainability. And in this sense, we can have a very important role played by competition authorities. We have a representative of competition authorities here, and courts. And that's the idea of jurisprudence once again. I stress an example here, but I skip it because I would like to focus on another profile. If yes, the idea of competition law plus. So it's an approach, I cannot say new, but it's an approach that is very interesting. Why? Because it considers competition, so the possibility of regulate market, giving more ideas, giving more strength to principles that have to lead the markets, not just economic profile, but, for example, the consumer welfare, the income distribution, the well-being of vulnerable communities. So that's the idea that is in the sustainability intended as a social sustainability. So that's the general idea that I wanted to stress in terms of theory. And we consider as well one other profile that is the international one. We are in a BRICS conference. So the international profile, in my view, is very important. Mr. Chairman, I know that I finished my 7 minutes, 2 minutes more, okay? 2 minutes more that I'm probably free, but I will try to be quick as much as possible. So international profile, very important cooperation of different nations as well. BRICS countries are different, but they can find a synergy to cooperate all together. That's the theoretical profile. So importance, the outcomes of the theoretical profiles are the recognition of an interplay between competition law and sustainability, the possibility to stress the social sustainability, and the function of policymakers and competition authorities in stressing this interplay. But let's consider as well, not the theoretical profile, that's the lawyer profile that is in me, because I'm not just professor, but I'm as well a lawyer. So it's not important. The theory is very important, but it's not just theory important. And let's consider a practical profile, starting from an analysis of 2013. My analysis of 2013, so I'm using the sources of an article, of 2013. Why? Not because I wasn't lazy. I was lazy and I didn't want to get newer material, but I want to show you the progression of the ideas of sustainable SDG in different countries using especially BRICS. So starting from Brazil, I will skip it and I will leave it to you if you want more comment later. We can consider that in all BRICS countries, there is a tendency to stress some targets of the SDG. So not all the targets are, sorry, the slides are blocked. It was everything working. I was very happy, but now no more. So anyway, considering—
It was 7 minutes or over, that's so.
So I feel, thank you very much. It was nice. So all these countries have expressed some profiles. Oh, that's going once again. So on India, it worked. I don't know why. Probably because we are in India. I'm not sure. So all the countries have this policy. Especially companies are trying to stress these profiles quite strongly. And why this profile is important? Because it shows what in 1886 H.C. Adams stressed. So the relationship between economic and jurisprudence. So if we have an economy that is very strong and pushing towards some kind of principle that are the SDG principle, these ideas are as well implemented and pushed by jurisprudence in terms of evolution, as I described before. So that's a very important profile on an economic point of view. If we slide, but it doesn't slide anyway. If we go to the jurisprudence in ECG, so in Europe, we consider the European Court of Justice. We have a trend that started with North Holland case that is a case of procurement law. Procurement law, as you know, is a special area of law that you know, and I don't want to consider it now, but expose especially authorities in stipulating, concluding contracts with a private. So in general, there was an idea that was that the authority can conclude a contract how the authority wanted, so without any kind of limits. But now, after North Holland case, and that's a progressive trend that we can consider, there is the pushing of this idea, so not just a discretionary approach of the authority, but an approach that considered as well environmental profile and social profile. So as well in jurisprudence, we notice this very strong stress and pushing toward the application of the SDG. So to conclude, sorry, Chairman, once again, my colleagues, so the idea is we have to consider for sure an interplay of competition, jurisprudence, sustainability, and probably just strengthening the links between these ideas, we can have a more sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dore. I know that you had much more to speak, especially related to jurisprudence. We were also eager to listen to that, but we have the constraint of time. I think we'll have some more opportunity once the one round is over. So now we come to Joel Abraham, who is Chief Executive Officer, Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission. He will be joining us virtually, and the topic he will be dealing with is concerns of small islands. Small islands, we all know, they get the maximum brunt of climate change or environmental issues. So they have their own specific problems. So I think let us listen to him.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be presenting and discussing about sustainability, climate change, as well as competition policy, and giving it a lens of small island states. So I'll quickly just talk about the FCCC and what do we do, our geographical and economic isolation, the vulnerability that we have to climate change, our dependency on external trade, the limited resources that we have, and how working along with other like islands, small islands, can be beneficial. So quickly, I mean, as a small island nation, we have a unique characteristic which basically sets us apart. Our geographical isolation is one, cultural richness, which ultimately leads to issues of social acceptance of change. Vulnerabilities and external factors also affect us. When we are looking at small island states, we're looking at the interdependency or how deeply sustainability is intertwined with the market economics. So the FCCC is a multi-sector regulator responsible for promoting competition, safeguarding consumer protection, setting prices and tariffs for industries that are near monopolies, and as well as licensing. For a small country like Fiji, one of the key things that we do is we face considerable vulnerabilities to climate change. And some of the key concerns that we have is, of course, rising sea levels, as low-lying islands, many Pacific states like Fiji, like Tuvalu, Kiribati, we are directly threatened by rising sea levels. And this can lead to loss of land, salinization of freshwater resources. Coastal erosions are happening, villages where we used to historically be able to plant food is also being now unutilized. We are also facing issues where traditional burial grounds, which were historically by the sea, are now having to move. Fiji, in fact, is the first country in the world to have climate-induced migration, and where we have had to relocate villages. We also face a lot of extreme weather events. In 2016, tropical cyclone Winston, the strongest cyclone ever to make landfall in the southern hemisphere, made landfall in Fiji. And we've seen the increase in the frequency as well as the intensity of cyclones, which leads to heavy rainfall. We also get flash flooding. And the major issue, economically speaking, for us is, of course, the infrastructure damages and the economic loss when we are not operating or when the market is shut. But from a social context as well, the loss of life not only means that families lose their loved ones, but it also means that we lose economic capability because productive members of the society can lose their lives during extreme weather events. And we are a island nation, meaning we are surrounded by water. We're in the Pacific Ocean, and any increase in the acidity of the ocean affects our marine ecosystems. And majority of our villages, our settlements, which are in the rural and maritime areas, they rely on communities, and these communities rely on the sea for food. And what this does, it threatens our economic sustainability. As it is, we have limited aspects for diversifications. Many of the other small island countries, much like Fiji, we heavily rely on a few sectors. Fiji, for example, relies heavily on tourism and agriculture. And any external shocks relating to extreme weather patterns, but as well as wars that go on, have a major impact on our local economy. We also have a high dependency on imports, and this is purely because of our limited resources. Many goods like essential items like fuel and food, these are important, leading to various trade imbalances and economic vulnerabilities. We also have limited access to markets. Being geographically isolated, we often face challenges in accessing larger markets. And just to give you some idea, Fiji in total having over 300 islands has a population of less than 1 million people, which is about 900,000. Now, when you look at reducing cost, etc., having a larger population base can have its positive effects by delivering economies of scale. Now, if I look at competition policy with this lens, by considering the geographical and economic isolation that we face, the issue that we have generally when we consider competition policy is the small market size. And small market size means may mean higher prices, may mean reduced consumer choices. There's also natural barriers to entry, and this is again because of our smallness. For example, we have one electricity provider, and due to the intensive capital expenditure that is required to replicate a similar infrastructure, the interest in some of these industries don't exist. And again, given the smallness of our country and our size, it may not be commercial to different electricity providers or to have different airport operators or seaport operators. And so, apart from this, we as a regulator in a small island country do face issues of limited resources and expertise, especially in dealing with such issues. Specifically, if you look at our universities, up until 4 years ago, we did not teach competition law or competition economics as part of any of our law or economic syllables within the degree programs. Just recently, one of the smaller universities has introduced one unit in the economic program dealing with competition, and one unit in the law program. Now, apart from this, our vulnerability extends to a socio-cultural aspect as well. We're looking at, in order to maintain our economic viability, we are having to rely a lot on tourism. And 40% of our GDP, in fact, is relied directly on the tourism market. And this can also lead to erosions in cultural practices and lead to cultural erosion. We also have had most recently a major brain drain, where our Fijian residents are now looking to reside either in Australia or in New Zealand, having largely because Australia and New Zealand as developed countries have opened up their markets. And so what we're seeing is an exodus of people migrating, and what that does is it causes a brain drain. So we already have a problem, and that problem is further exacerbated by the loss of human capital. And apart from that, as I mentioned earlier, being a small island, we have an inherent dependence on external trade. And this ultimately filters into our work, which is ensuring that there is a fair and competitive market. And
Joel, you
all of,
may have to conclude. Okay, you may have to
yes,
conclude.
sure. And we do have limited resourcing in terms of infrastructure and capabilities. We have limited infrastructure due to our smallness, impacts of climate change. We don't have storm resistance building. We have started making investments into seawalls, nature-based seawalls, where we have boulders and mangroves integrated. There is a need to build capacity around having resilient infrastructure. We also do have access to finance constraints, whereby we are 0.0004% global emissions as a country, but we face impacts of climate change quite strongly. In terms of our environmental sustainability, looking at issues of resource management, waste management, and biodiversity loss, I think this is quite important, given that we have unique flora and fauna on our islands, and habitat destruction as well as invasive species can affect the work that we do. The role that competition policy quickly has in promoting green technologies. We're looking at competition policy being a catalyst for innovation. We're constantly doing advocacy by driving this in the market, looking at new frontiers in green technologies, or looking at benchmarking and getting green technologies. We're also looking at the competition policy having safeguards for the market by enabling newer firms, especially those firms that are focused on environmental sustainability and sustainable practices, for them to emerge and thrive. There are a few examples in Fiji, like the Pacific Recycling Foundation or ESG Pacific. This will not only enrich the market, but also give consumers a plethora of choices. We also feel that there is a need to look at climate change and its impact on the competitive landscape. Given that climate change has far-reaching impacts, it's not only now an environmental concern, but for us, it's a significant variable that can alter the competition of markets. One example I can bring to you is the shipping market. We used to have about 5 different operators. During TC Winston, 2 of those operators got wiped out because their boats ran aground and they did not have money to get back in, and the insurance did not pay enough. As such, they pushed out of the market. As such, I think there is a need for a balancing act between competition policy as well as our climate goals. The imperative that our policies not only incentivize sustainable practices among businesses, but also ensure that the spirit of competition in which we believe innovation can be driven is not stifled. And we will continue to explore realms of collaboration, not only in terms of competitors, but we're looking at what are the overarching climate goals, and we are ensuring that our our competition policies provide rooms for collaborative endeavors. And that is why I'll quickly just wrap up with the way forward. FCCC is strengthening sustainability regulation. We are creating a climate change division within the FCCC that will look at all our market-based analysis to look at market competition. We're also working in tandem with other Pacific Island countries in promoting sustainable business practices, as well as looking at cross-border enforcement from a competition policy enforcement perspective. We feel that a multifaceted approach is needed in addressing these challenges, and that through regional cooperation, because we see the Pacific as one, whatever happens in Fiji, other Pacific countries are affected as well. And as such, we are combating the issues of climate change by combining our resources and our efforts in the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was very comprehensive. You highlighted, brought in a very stark focus the issues faced by small island economies. We have a related topic coming up. That's Willard Moemba, Director and Chief Executive Officer, COMESA, Competition Commission. Yesterday, he came, I think, twice. So we are familiar with him. And the topic he will be handling is regional competition policy approach vis-a-vis climate change. I would like to request that try to be within 7 minutes.
Indeed, our attempt to speak within the 7 minutes is quite limited time, but I'll try to move a bit fast. Let me share my screen. Climate change is quite a real issue that cuts across all sectors of the economy. And just like competition law and consumer policy cuts across all sectors of the economy. So it requires the concerted efforts of all stakeholders, including competition authorities. And it is very true that this climate change is unfolding right before our eyes and within our lifetimes. So these are real issues. Let me now proceed to my presentations. I think some of these things have already been spoken about by other presenters. Now, I'll be talking about what the COMESA Competition Commission, I'll avoid saying the CCC because my other colleague was also they also call themselves the CCC. What are some of the issues that we are, actions that we are taking to contribute to addressing climate issues in the COMESA region, which involves 21 member states from the northern, eastern, and southern part of Africa? One of the issues that we are focusing on is the development and dissemination of competition law and policy. The COMESA Competition Commission is responsible for developing and disseminating information about competition and consumer protection policy pursuant to Article 7 of the COMESA competition regulations. Now, in this dissemination and development of the competition law and policy, what we are doing currently is to ensure that we amend our law. The process is already at an advanced stage. We should be seeing a new law next year. And in that amendment, there are environmental and sustainable consumption issues that have been brought about. Now, as we've been developing and this law, our COMESA member states are heavily involved, especially national competition authorities. So it is our expectation that as they see what is happening at regional level, they replicate the same efforts at national level. And of course, after this, the Commission is expected again to disseminate that new law, that developed law. Its content should be disseminated to the member states. Currently, we've been issuing joint statements with our member states on issues of sustainable consumption and transition into green energy, which are part of climate change or efforts towards addressing climate change issues. So I do recall that early this year, we did issue some joint statements with Rwanda and Zambia, so just as to maintain and sustain the momentum on these green and environmental considerations in competition enforcement. The other thing that we are doing also is to enter into cooperation arrangements with regional competition authorities, especially those whose situations may be similar to ours, so that we have common interests in developing some of these policies. So we have, for example, entered into cooperation arrangements with the Eurasia Economic Commission, and in that cooperation arrangement, there are a number of issues that we intend to work together to work on together, and environmental considerations in competition enforcement is one of those. But we've also entered into some arrangements with cooperating partners. UNECA, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Not long ago, I think late last week, I was at a conference where I was invited to speak, where they are talking about the consideration of green the environmental considerations under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Competition Protocol. So there is also that proactive and deliberate approach to ensuring that even before the protocol, the AFCFTA competition protocol becomes enforceable, we are trying to see how those green issues and environmental considerations will be taken into account. From a restrictive business practices point of view, or what we generally call conduct cases, anti-competitive conduct, under Article 20 of the COMESA competition regulations, companies can come and make an application before the Commercial Competition Commission to seek authorization on whether their agreement or agreements among them can proceed. So basically, where they are not so sure that their agreements are anti-competitive or are pro-competitive, they can come and make an application to the Commercial Competition Commission to ensure that they are not on the wrong side of the law. In the amendment, what we are trying to do now is under that Article 20 application on authorization of agreements, we are introducing environmental considerations as a public interest issue. However, we want to be very careful in doing that. We are saying we'll be weighing these environmental benefits, among other considerations, against anti-competitive effects of those agreements. We do not want to create a platform for collusion, while we know that green considerations are very important. Climate change is an existential threat, but we are also very mindful that we should not lose focus on the traditional consideration of competition law itself. And we are saying the obtaining benefits, those benefits that will come from those claims that the agreements will bring, should be enjoyed more by the consumers and not by the firms alone. Why are we saying this? We are mindful that when businesses are engaging in business decisions or implementation of those business decisions, usually it is in their own interest and not the interest of the consumer. So indeed, they may come up with this agreement amongst themselves that may result in new technologies towards environmental concerns and the like, but it may just be in their self-interest to make more profit. So we are saying there should be a demonstration that actually the benefits are enjoyed more by consumers and not just the firms themselves. In the area of mergers and acquisition, we are also introducing environmental factors to be part of public interest considerations. There is indeed, for example, under the review of anti-competitive agreements already, there is what is called public benefits. And it is very clear that if the public benefits of an anti-competitive agreement overrides, if the benefits overrides the anti-competitive effects, then the Commission may, underlined italics and bold, allow that anti-competitive agreement. But environmental issues have not been expressly spelled out there, and we do not want to use this public interest or public benefit wording in our law to cast the net so unreasonably wide, for we do not think that is the right approach. Certainty is also important in competition and consumer law enforcement. So we are introducing expressly the environmental factors as being part of public interest. The same will happen in mergers. But we are also being cautious in measures. We are saying there's need to be to make sure that these environmental issues are quantifiable. We don't want to unnecessarily frustrate mergers and acquisitions and ultimately investments by being unreasonably considerate of environmental issues. So we are saying we would need to find a way of making sure that these are quantifiable. And that brings in another matter. Do competition and consumer authorities have this expertise? Do they have these skills to ensure that those environmental concerns are quantifiable? Maybe no, but then that will then, this is what will require us to cooperate with a number of stakeholders, as I said at the beginning, including environmental authorities as we are doing that work. We are still contemplating on whether a pro-competitive measure could be rejected on environmental effect consideration. For now, we believe this is not the best approach. Public interest should not be used to reject pro-competitive measures. That is our thinking and our ethos at the Commercial Competition Commission. However, we are mindful that given the dynamism in the world approaches to regulation, the dynamism, especially the rate at which climate change is evolving, maybe there's also need to reconsider Maybe there's also a need for a paradigm shift from the traditional consideration of these matters to address emerging and practical issues, including rejecting measures on environmental grounds. We are yet to see how that will unfold, but what we are saying is there should be certainty, there should be clear guidelines so that there's no confusion in the market. And finally, as I conclude, as you may know, the COMESA Competition Commission does not only regulate competition in the 21 member states, but also is responsible for consumer protection. And we are aware also that the ultimate goal of considering environmental issues in the enforcement of competition law is actually for the benefit of consumers. Therefore, in our amendments, especially to the consumer law, we intend to include the right to a clean environment as part of consumer rights, and it should be justiciable. So we know under the United Nations guidelines on consumer rights, the consumer has a right to a clean environment. But in most of our member states, if not all our member states, at least from a consumer law perspective, this issue of the right to a clean environment is not justiciable. We are making it express in our law, and we are saying it should be justiciable. And where it is justiciable, it means those companies that are not adhering to environmental concerns as they deal with consumers may actually violate the regulations and may be brought to book. Other considerations include making eco-labeling mandatory for consumers to make informed decisions on environmental friendly products. But we are aware also that with this eco-labeling, greenwashing is likely to be rife, as other speakers have spoken about already. And therefore, we want to come up with deliberate strategies to enforce against greenwashing, which we are already doing under the misleading advertising, because our law already has that. But I think there will be a deliberate effort, especially when we get into this ecosphere of eco-labeling.
You have to conclude.
Thank you so much. I'm almost winding up. In terms of policy, we've already started sensitizing and collaborating with member states on environmental sustainability issues to and enhancement of harmonization of policies and laws. And then finally, we think there should be a gradual application of environmental standards. This is a new thing that is coming on the scene. Most of us are talking about it, but have not implemented it. So it is implementation. We think we should not distort markets with a good intention, but probably flawed implementation. So we're saying the application and advocacy for inclusion of environmental considerations should be done at a gradual, carefully considered and crafted in a format that does not create barriers to entry, especially in most of the less developed countries. Our small companies may not have the capacity in terms of financial resources, in terms of skills, technical know-how, who actually implement some of these green considerations that we are looking for, or we are putting into consideration. Hence, that can become a barrier to entry and enforcing or resulting in entrenched market concentrations by dominant firms who may have that capacity. So I may end here, and thank you very much for giving the COMESA Competition Commission the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Willard. Very glad to know that there is a system you have taken concrete action towards this end. That is authorization from the Commission, whether they can proceed in the case of agreements. But how you proceed, maybe there are some guidelines you would be eager to know later. Again, merger, again, you are taking into account public benefits, which include environmental benefits. Maybe look forward. We thought we'll have some time. I don't know whether we'll have another time to have another round. Now we turn to Hee-Yu Kim, who is the Director, Competition Policy, Asia Pacific of Meta. She will be enlightening us on reconciling ESG with competition law.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. I'm Hee-Yun from Meta. I'm the Competition Policy Director responsible for the Asia Pacific region. Let me begin by thanking CUTS International and Meta India team for extending the kind invitation to this prestigious conference. I know that I'm sitting between lunch and and this panel. So I'll be just very briefly share some thoughts about from a private sector perspectives. The topic of climate change is very personal to me. It's more than 10 years ago, but I wrote 2 papers on climate change. The first one was about the role of IP, the patent system, in stimulating innovation and technology for climate change. And the second paper was about adding the climate change consideration in protecting intangible cultural heritage. So when Joel from Fiji mentioned, the challenges that small island countries are facing, that really remind me of the paper, because as the sea level rises, that people have to be moved, and as a result, the intangible cultural heritage like traditions can also be lost. So we can talk about this another time. For today's panel, the question that I'll be addressing is how we reconcile the ESG and competition law. And before delving into that question about how, let me begin with why. Why do we think that there is something to be reconciled between the ESG and the competition law? As Elena helpfully mentioned earlier, competition law and policy and sustainability are gradually merging and should integrate more closely. And as Ettore mentioned, there is also a progressive view that 2 could even be combined. As you know, the ESG focus on 3 things, right? The promoting environmental sustainability, and social responsibility, and governance and ethical business practices. And none of these goals can be done alone, because this is a collective fight for the planet. So companies need to get together to achieve this goal together. And before joining Meta, I've worked for Samsung as an in-house counsel, competition counsel. And oftentimes we face these questions. The company wants to join environmental initiatives or human rights initiatives, but often there are, other members who are competitors like Apple, Sony, also in the same initiatives. And the question is it okay to join, or is it going to be some sort of competition issue? And when I look back, what's helpful could have been to have some clear guardrails based on a forward-looking policy approach about what's allowed and what is not allowed. Let me share some examples of how we can achieve this. First, self-regulation. As a starting point, I think industry self-regulation or voluntary codes of conduct can be established to promote or to achieve ESG practices. Of course, these initiatives should normally have very strict antitrust compliance in place. If these initiatives are done correctly, it can be pro-competitive and can benefit the society as a whole. In fact, self-regulation can be a good starting point to tackle other new policy areas, for example, digital platforms. I know that the next session will be about digital platforms, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I do want to flag that some Asian countries, like Korea and Japan, are taking a self-regulation approach about digital platforms, especially for improving unfair bargaining position between platforms and its users. This gives all market participants, not only the platforms, but also platform users, the necessary flexibility to ensure that today's regulation will not stifle tomorrow's innovation and growth, which is what we need, especially for Asia. Secondly, regulatory guidance. We heard that more and more competition regulators are providing guidance on how sustainability can be dealt with within the competition policy framework and consumer protection, as we heard from Bridget. In the Asian region, Korea and Singapore have very clear-cut, in my view, holistic guidelines on sustainability. We can come back to this later if we have time. Third, regulatory dialogue. I think open communication among regulators, competition regulators on the one hand and sectoral regulators on the other, or between regulators and stakeholders are going to be very, very important so that we can align objectives and address uncertainties in the regulatory landscape. Last but not least, compliance is going to be very important as well. It will be wise to involve your legal team and the compliance department in ESG-related decision-making. So to conclude, I think reconciling the ESG and competition law would require some clear guardrails on what can be done and what should not be done. And that way companies can pursue ESG related initiatives while respecting a fair play spirit. So I'll stop here for now and thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being on time. And you have given some soft skills to achieve the reconciling between ESG and competition law. And the organizers have permitted us to extend by 10 minutes, otherwise we are just completing our time allotted. So I think we should, I had some questions I had circulated also, but I think we don't have that luxury now. I think it is open to the floor. If anybody has got any comments, any questions, I think.
Thank you. A question for Willard, and he mentioned that in the laws they're thinking of adding some not public benefits. He didn't want to describe them as public benefits, but environmental characteristics which would go to mitigating anti-competitive harms and thus allow the authorization of agreements. I'm a bit puzzled as to why you don't think public benefits include quantifiable measures that would be of an environmental character, and that you made that point a couple of times. It would seem to me, and from the laws that I've seen in many countries, the public benefits can be of that character. So unless yours are ones that need to address the anti-competitive effect, but perhaps you just might explain that. Thank you.
Willard?
Yes,
Yeah, please.
I'm here.
Very brief, 1 minute.
Thank you so much. No, it's a very brilliant question. And in fact, the question is basically speaking to what I said. So public benefits is one of the considerations under our Article 20 in request for authorization of agreements. But it's also one of the considerations under our Article 22, where the Commission initiates an investigation into anti-competitive agreements. But what is written is simply public benefits. What is considered under public benefits has been left to the discretion of the Commission. So indeed, we can infuse in environmental issues as long as they are quantifiable. But what we'll be looking at now, the concern or the issue now is, how do we quantify these environmental claims by companies? Because companies are also good at making wild claims, whether it is about the employment benefits that the measure will bring about, the reduction in prices. They make sometimes wild claims. I think we have developed to quantify employment gains, price reduction gains, but not environmental benefits. So we are saying, first of all, as we come up with guidelines, the public benefits consideration, environmental issues come out expressly as that which will be considered under public benefits. And then we're saying it will be expressed that these are concerns or claims that should be expressly quantifiable and demonstrable in the way they'll benefit the consumer. So I think we are on the same page with the gentleman asking the question. Maybe the focus for us is on the how. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Only issue what I find that in the case of India and Australia also, I know there are factors defined in law which will define public interest, which have to be taken into account by the Commission. But if it is left to the discretion of the commission, as Vila was telling, I think there may be issue. But yes, I am sure that you are in the process of making guidelines, and maybe jurisprudence also will help. So I hope, I think we will proceed in.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Alexey Ivanov. I have a question to Rigid and Hyun. Both you covered this corporate aspect of sustainable development process, and we know that SDGs are not really fulfilled, and there is a little progress in fulfillment, and at the same time a lot of corporate practices which we call like greenwashing and all these sham practices, and at the same time there is a lot of reliance, and you mentioned this, on self organization, self-regulation, self-adaptation, corporate governance, and social responsibility things. I mean, don't you think that probably one of the problem with fulfillment of the goals is actually non-binding, characteristics of this, and whether you think we already, had enough of self-regulation, which didn't really end up with anything except some sort of, greenwashing practices, which Rigid was describing perfectly, or maybe, corporate structures just intrinsically are not capable to invest into something, except, profit maximizing activities. Maybe we should, just a provocative question, just forget about self-regulatory aspect of this story and become more serious about, accomplishment of SDGs.
Yeah, thanks, Alexei, for your question. The sustainable development goal is about anything and everything under the sun. Let's probably create a scope for my intervention and response. If we look at sustainable development goals from the perspective of the ability of corporates to address challenges in their value chains, right? Let's look at that. Let's create a boundary. Now, if you're okay with that, if you look at this issue historically in the last 15, 20 years, what has really happened is that regulation has oscillated between public regulation and private regulation. Initially, there was an array of public regulations, and governments thought that they would be able to address those challenges. National legislations were developed and so on and so forth. And of course, we did not achieve what we were supposed to achieve on either on environment or on social side, or even on governance. And therefore, market-driven instruments were developed to create incentive for the market players who were, performing at a certain level of sustainability performance, to give them that kind of market incentive. So there was a regulatory sort of oscillatory shift towards private regulation, with all the voluntary sustainability standards coming in. And if you look at, for example, right now there are about 400 voluntary sustainability standards in the marketplace. Now, again, if you look at what has happened in Brussels, the pendulum has shifted back, because now they've realized what you said, that private regulation is probably not enough. So we would like to develop legislations in international global value chains. Whatever is happening in Brussels, whether the European Union, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and several others which are currently being developed, not just in Brussels, but also in the UK, in the US, many OECD countries. So again, there is a shift in it has oscillated towards private regulation. So one cannot replace the other. Perhaps there is a need for sort of coexistence of both the private regulation and the public regulation, and the two legislations will have to find ways of working together, which we haven't so far. So we are just moving from one to the other, and this oscillatory movement will continue to happen without the reconciliation of the two regulatory elements.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, this is a very good question. And I think I totally agree with what Richard said. We need both systems. And already the trend is that going to, impose more stimulate companies to do more. But I also want to think about, the other side of, the chilling effect, potentially chilling effect, that we need some certainty about, okay, when we may run into legal risks or not. For example, let's say a company sets a very bold, audacious goal to, sustainability, and then let's say the company meet the goal, maybe like, have 50%, but not 100%. Would it make the company as a fraud? It shouldn't be, because at least I think the company should be, at least recognized for the effort that it has made. So if there are more scrutinies about companies, doing things, but then not meeting whatever goals, and I think there will be also chilling effects on, further innovation and further creation or business growth. So I think we need to look at both sides as well.
What you said, what she said is very critical, because I think there has been a failure of all practitioners, because we've looked at sustainability as a binary between a yes and a no. It's either you either comply and therefore you are sustainable, or you do not comply and therefore you're unsustainable. But it is the gray in the middle which is most important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Actually, to be fair to the online or virtual participants, I think Professor Tapan, I think he had been signaling that he wanted to raise some question. Is Professor Tapan still there? Yeah, please. Very brief. You have any question?
Thank you.
Please,
Actually,
please.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Actually, it was the host was not allowing me to unmute, so it was not my fault.
Sorry. Yeah,
Anyway.
sorry for that.
No, sir. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I was listening very interesting this conversation. But what I think, there are certain ways like a social compact, where companies themselves try to bring certain responsibility on themselves. But what I am finding at the ground level, like most companies are actually transferring the responsibility to non-governmental NGOs. So what organizations? So what is happening that, for example, like plantation or the schooling, so they give the part of their CSR fund to these organizations, and then there is no accountability either on them or the companies. So consequently, what happens if there are 15,000 transplantations done in ground level? If 2,000, that is the maximum is possible, but ordinarily we don't find anything. So I think apart from that, responsibility and accountability is important, and we need to both public-private participation in the sense. Otherwise, regulations do not work. So that's what I think, and where companies probably should be more proactive in the directions that where their fund is going, and are they really benefiting the community, the company, or the public, like that. So that is what my thing. I think we need to have a rethinking about it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that suggestion is well taken. I don't think anybody has got a different view about that. Only thing is that the targets are specified in terms of financial terms. So the companies make it they don't have to divert their attention, so they delegate to somebody else. You are right. I think there are some flip side to that. Okay. Anybody else? I think that's it. I think we have also consumed the 10+% sort of minutes we have been granted. So thank you very much, the panelists. They have done an excellent job. So very, at least I have benefited very much. I'm sure that all of us very well prepared presentations. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for CUTS and the other organizers for the very well organized conference. Thank you very much. Thank you.